Awakening in a strange land, Efka knows that he has been cursed. He probably did something bad to deserve that, but he doesn't want to be cursed, so he'll bumble around trying to find a way to reverse it. However, in a land as mystifying as this, it may be impossible for him to find his location. Seeking to discover his way, and with no map, he must trace routes and navigate terrain. Otherwise, he might die, naked, alone, and afraid. Although he has no idea whatsoever about local values or customs, he attempts to trade. This isn't greatly successful, nor is his ability to blend in. In fact, he looks like a pillock. Precious resources, such as wood, can be a bugger to find. Efka must scavenge all he can carry. As hunger overcomes him, he hunts out a local delicacy. Putting his presumptions aside, he must eat what they eat, otherwise he'll starve, which is slightly worse than possibly contracting dysentery.
Oh my god, it's horrible. F this. I'm getting the bus home.
Hey you! Stop what you're doing and pay attention, because this isn't just any Johnny Cardboard we're talking about. Seventh Continent deserves your attention, your single tabbing to YouTube, maybe even full screening and actually listening. Let me say this now so that it sinks in. Of all the games that have been or will be in 2017, none are so ambitious or inventive or unique as Seventh Continent. Actually, scratch that, because this isn't a game. It's an idea, a mad fever vision printed onto cardstock, where in an absurd reality against all odds this game exists. And the punchline is that this absurd reality is our reality. Because the designers of Seventh Continent didn't just want to deliver a Euro game to your doorstep, or a legacy game, or a pick up and deliver game. No, they wanted to deliver a whole freaking continent, nothing less.
This is not the Seventh Continent. This is just a small island. Your first steps into it, a vision of things to come. It's a bit like the Isle of Wight, but with a bit less cows and a bit more to do. In Seventh Continent, you'll be playing a board game version of a choose-your-own-adventure game, where everything you can do is depicted on the artwork. You visually see what you can do, and then some symbols denote actions that you can take, and then when you take the action, whether you succeed or lose, you'll be instructed to take another card, and then you look at that card and things will happen. From here on onwards, we're only going to be showing you this island, because we don't want to spoil things, because part of the charm of the Seventh Continent is discovering what the continent is for yourself. And now just imagine that the Isle of Wight was mandatory as the starting place for entering and understanding Britain. Wouldn't things be different? In fact, I've never seen any game work as hard at simply not telling you what it is you're going to be doing. This manual right here teaches you about 50% of all the rules in the game, and it just kind of hopes that you'll pick things up as you go along because of its relatively simple yet alien feeling system. We've seen similar ambition earlier in the year in this War of Mine, but whereas that game made you stop in your tracks, banging your head against the insistence of not teaching you what you need to know to progress, in Seventh Continent, weirdly, it just works.
Well then, what are you actually going to be doing? I'm afraid I've got no good answer for you apart from that you're going to be exploring. Actually, that's not quite true. Within the rules of the game, you will be cursed, and you will fiddle your way around this massive continent, attempting to try and lift it like some sort of curse fiddler. The curse that you choose will give you some clues as to how to lift it, and give you a starting location, and off you go. And from there on, all you have to really do is look, each card forming an exploratory dossier of places you've been and things you've seen, and each white square with a pictogram in it will depict the actions you can take. And there's so many actions that there's a whole cardboard slab of things that you can do. But that's not it, because there's even some more peculiar ones, like where you've eaten some fruit because you're super hungry, but actually it looks okay, but it's actually not okay, but then you can't find any kind of porcelain in the forest or jungle that you're in, and that's a real problem in the game.
Seventh Continent is a game that delivers about 80% of the information you need to know via images, symbols, and sometimes hidden objects. Instead of telling you what things are, it lets you observe, and then of course the immediate inclination you have is to verbalize what you see to other people. What you end up with is a game that doesn't just force the narrative onto you via text blurbs, but instead gently nudges you towards looking and discussing what you see, and that is so much more powerful. The more you play, the more you geographically understand where you are, what to do, and how to get about, to give you an idea, a perspective of its size and scope. If this starter island, this Isle of Wight, takes up a small portion of my table, then the entire continent is going to take up my living room floor, perhaps even more. And it's full of mountains and snowscapes and jungles and mysterious dungeons and temples and deserts and crustaceans and spiders and snakes. It's Australia on steroid. And talking of crustaceans, the food card is particularly funny in this game because it says meat/crustacean, and it just makes me think there's such a thing as vegetable crustacean. Either way, you're getting crabs.
You could say that it's too big, but lots of little great things come out of its size. Some of the encounters are scary, but not in an obvious way, like playing Killer Bunnies with all the expansions smushed together scary. More like, what's this little thing here? What should I check that out? That kind of scary. It's like a sense of disquiet, like seeing a tiny little bit of raisin just poking out of a bagel. You might opt to go there, hike up your pants, throw caution to the wind, and find that... I'm not going to spoil it for you. Or you may tentatively step away from it and because of the sheer scope of this game, never discover what that thing was. Or it may come up in an entirely different playthrough. It's like the same continent but looking at it through a different lens. That, to me, right there, is a representation of mystery in a board game.
Aha! Danger! Much like leaking a melted battery, your curiosity is fraught with peril because, after all, you are still a human being, and as such you need to eat, sleep, poop, take an occasional selfie and post it on Twitter, and someone to tell you that it's going to be alright. It is. It will be alright.
Each time you want to perform an action, you dip into the action deck, much like dipping a soldier into an egg. And sometimes you get too much yolk, sometimes you get just the right amount of yolk, or sometimes your yolk gets yolked away as you trip up the egg cup with your soldier and now the yolk is all over the table. At times the game will tell you to draw lots of cards but you don't need any successes, or draw as many cards as you like but you need, for example, 2 successes, or draw the exact amount of cards and get the exact amount of successes that it wants with no room for manoeuvre at all. Basically, your chance of succeeding is based on how many cards you're drawing and how many successes you need. And fortunately, there's a handy table in the rulebook, and if you care about that, then there's an illustration of what you are. It's okay. I care about that too. But the trick is, once you've gone through this whole deck, then you're out of willpower, and your poor little brave soldier might not be around for so much longer. If you get enough stars or successes, then success! You get to draw a card out of this gigantic deck, picking just the right one and revealing something like a new piece of land, or a cool item, or maybe even something to do with the lore of the island, like the history, the culture, flora, fauna, which is an immensely satisfying Pavlovian reward, also known as, ooh, I get to draw a card! The trick is, though, these cards that I was talking about earlier, the action cards, you remember how I said that if you run out of them, you run out of willpower, or you starve, or you get beaten to death by cliff rocks, then it turns out that that analogy could not be more apt, because these cards also represent ideas that your character can have. And you only get to keep one of them, just one. Because we wouldn't want you getting ideas now.
These then go into your hand where they'll sit until you inevitably decide that they're rubbish ideas and you're better off getting some new ideas, and then you'll draw some Panpipes because they're just a better idea, aren't they? And they're also an item, meaning you can draw more cards to build them, getting more ideas that you can then later build into more items, and on it goes until you have so many items that you can't handle all of it, and you'll just stack them all up together into one uber item. This is where the game gets a bit weird, because combining a meat steak together with a shovel within the rules of the game is completely fine. In fact, this item stacking becomes so peculiar that we've discovered that the woven basket is actually the most broken, overpowered item in the game. Still, once you get past the ludonarrative dissonance, you realise that it complements the game nicely and lets you have the best of both worlds, forcing you to send potential items away, but at the same time letting you keep the best of them. And sometimes it doesn't really matter that you've barely found an opportunity to play your Panpipes. They're nice and you want to keep them, and you've gotten good at playing them. You didn't really think I could play this, did you? The initial curse, titled The Voracious Goddess, is recommended as the starting curse, and it took us approximately 25 hours to complete. I say approximately because, unfortunately, after about 15 hours of playing the game, we decided to stop and just look through the rest of it. And I'll explain why in just a second, but let me get back to that. The subsequent curses only took us about 3 hours to complete each and are significantly shorter, but don't be afraid of the whole 25-hour thing. You're not meant to play the game in one go, and in fact we wouldn't recommend anyone trying, and we wouldn't recommend playing it for longer than 3 hours. In fact, just to complement that, there's a fantastic save system that lets you pack the game in just mere minutes, and it takes just as long to set it back up. Regardless, the game's length is a problem. Now, I don't want it to be a problem. I want to love this game oh so very much. But not only is it a problem, it is a kernel, a seed that blossoms into a cataclysmic redwood of problems. I can't help but feel that for all its cleverness, Seven Continent has this one fatal flaw, and that is the length of the initial adventure and the fact that the subsequent adventures are much shorter. I get what it's trying to do. It's trying to teach you the continent so that in the subsequent adventures you have that knowledge armed. But sadly, I feel like a much more sensible design approach would have been to teach you little bits of the continent in shorter adventures first, and then let the players have the globe-trotting adventure that they always wanted, if they wanted. But this is not where we end.
The intrinsic problem with large open worlds is that they're large and consequently they have to have stuff to fill them. The larger they are, the more interesting stuff you have to have going on. Otherwise you end up with repetitive, boring, vast, boring planes. And whilst scope in itself is an excellent marketing trick, come into our thing, let's do this thing, and this is big. This is really big, so big that you'll forget you're even playing a game. But somewhere down the line, the magic has got to wear off. And then what do we have?
Sadly, we have a game with a not particularly interesting story stretched out so thin it's bound to give you a wedgie. And what do games do when they have a not particularly interesting story? That's right, they rely on cheap tricks. To its credit, it is doing essentially the same thing that Choose Your Own Adventure books do, and in that regard, it is faithful to the source material. It's just that I always argued that those same cheap tricks don't work as well in games. But I have to admit that even at its most mundane, Seven Continent still manages to astonish you with its cleverness and a truly open design, because there are always so many ways you can approach a given objective. The freedom is given to you. It's just a shame that that freedom is stretched pretty thin and can sometimes lead you on a 5-hour-long red herring. Not to double down on some very harsh criticism, but the story that it does have certainly has some very strange ideas. Again, not to spoil things, but you will be playing basic run-of-the-mill explorer characters, made-up explorer characters, or, to drastically juxtapose them, Victor Frankenstein, who for some reason in the artwork is depicted as Frankenstein's monster, but yet within the context of the game is still Victor. And you think, if you think that that is particularly silly, wait till you hear this. Good old Hewlett Packard Lovecraft makes his way into the game. And I have no problem with embracing Lovecraft's fiction, but I have a serious problem with embracing Lovecraft as a playable character. Look, I get what's going on here. It is a send-off, an homage to pulp fiction, the genre that this game is clearly married to. But I don't buy Lovecraft as heroic. In fact, I would love for you to list some of his heroic qualities. Struggling? Here, let me give you a helping hand. Forget for a moment that the man was wildly racist. Not only that, but he was a shut-in, he married only because his mother made him, he was afraid of women and large bodies of water, basically everything he didn't understand, hence the fear of the unknown. I feel like making him a playable character and therefore bestowing heroics onto him is a seriously misguided faux pas.
For all its vastness and grandiose scope, Seventh Continent feels empty, less of a world and more of a large open space strung together with puzzles. Except those puzzles never really feel intricate or challenging, more like trying to learn information and then applying that information that you have learned. It's like moving to your student town and then drinking for 2 days straight until you realise that actually you need some proper sustenance and can't carry on like this. And then it's a do or die quest to find the local Iceland. And while some students have inevitably perished that way, each subsequent trip to Iceland feels less of an escapade and more of a chore. There's only so long you can ride on a sense of wonder, and getting from one place to the other through swathes of empty territory can feel long and drawn out. You'll be thinking to yourself, why can't I go back to that time where I was drinking myself stupid for 2 days straight? But then you'll realise that that is not what life is all about. That is not where you will find joy.
Honestly, there is no one in this world that wanted to like the Seventh Continent more than I did. Not only was I enamored by the idea of its scope, but as a reviewer, you just see so many things that are more of the same. And this holds so much potential, has so many ideas. It's loin-rumblingly laden with things that make my heart sing. And for the first 5 hours or so, it did make my heart sing. It's just that the more I pottered about, the more I realized that all I was doing was pottering about and finding out more details about my curse felt tedious and uninspired, because just like any other Lovecraftian story-based game, you just get the same punchless punchline, except it takes 25 hours to get there. What wouldn't I give to be able to recommend Seventh Continent? And you know what? I almost feel like I can. Maybe the game is worth getting for just those first 5 hours of riveting exploration. And maybe you're not the sort of person who cares if there's a lot of story there. Maybe you're happy to just have those little tidbits of the game stringing you along. Maybe you're in it for the sense of discovering an entirely unique and perfectly working system of delivering a game experience. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm right, but this game got me wrong, and it hung me high and dry. If you enjoyed this video, then
Don't subscribe.
Would you? Oh, no, yes. Okay, so we need to tell you something very important. Our dear friend, John,
Curtis,
from a channel called Actual LOL, this is so perfectly synchronized, is having a Patreon to continue his channel growing. John is not only a friend and a colleague, but most importantly, he's someone who we've come to respect and whose work influences what we do, and he continuously makes us strive to be better at what we're doing. So if you like our channel, if you enjoy what we do, if you are a subscriber, then please go check John's channel out if you don't know about it. It's in the description or just links everywhere. And if you do know him, consider maybe donating a little bit of money to help keep his thing going.
okay.
Okay.